bullet. Oh, my God. Oh, man. Whoa.
Preliminary assessments show that nearly 70% of homes and buildings in the coastal counties sustained wind-related damage during the recent hurricane. Over 40 mobile homes were completely overturned, and at least 12 commercial structures lost significant portions of their roofs. Utility poles were snapped along 19 major roads, and wind gusts were measured up to 129 miles per hour in some areas. Officials noted that older buildings were disproportionately affected. Insurance teams have begun documenting losses, with early estimates in the hundreds of millions. Emergency shelters remain at capacity as debris removal continues. Following the hurricane's landfall, hundreds of birds were found lifeless across downtown rooftops and streets, apparently killed mid-flight by powerful windbursts. Experts believe the sudden pressure changes and extreme gusts disoriented or crushed them mid-air. They had no chance, said a local wildlife official. It was like a wall of air moving at highway speeds. Residents were stunned by the eerie sight. It looked like they just fell from the sky, one woman said. Cleanup crews collected the bodies as part of post-storm recovery. Scientists call the event rare, but not unprecedented.
Isso é a natureza. Barra Shopping Sul.
No one expected the tree to survive. It had stood in the town square for over a century, and as the storm hit, People watched it bend almost to the ground. The next morning, every building around it was damaged. Windows shattered, signs ripped off, but the tree still stood, stripped of leaves but upright. Someone tied a ribbon to its trunk. 2 days later, others added flowers, candles, handwritten notes. It became a quiet monument to the idea that some things, even in chaos, can hold fast. As winds intensified and their home began to shake, the Patel family abandoned their living room and climbed into the walk-in freezer at the back of their restaurant. With wind screaming outside and parts of the roof tearing away, they sat in darkness for over an hour, surrounded by bags of frozen vegetables and crates of meat. "It was the only room with no windows and a steel door," said Mrs. Patel. When they emerged, the dining area was destroyed, but the freezer was untouched. "Cold never felt so safe," joked their teenage son. During peak gusts, Harold Grant stepped outside to check on his generator and was lifted off his feet by hurricane winds. He landed 30 feet away in a muddy ditch, stunned but alive. "It felt like a hand just picked me up and dropped me," he said. He suffered bruises and a fractured wrist, but managed to crawl back inside his home before the next wave of wind hit. Emergency crews later found trees snapped like twigs in his yard. "I'll never take wind warnings lightly again," Grant said from his hospital bed, smiling weakly. The morning after, children wandered the neighborhood, pointing out what had changed. "That tree wasn't broken before," one said. "That trampoline wasn't there." They turned it into a game, spot the difference, but the parents watched in silence, tallying lost cars, collapsed roofs, shredded fences. One boy found a soggy storybook in a ditch and began reading aloud, sitting cross-legged on the wet sidewalk. Others joined him. For a moment, no one remembered the night's terror, only the sound of a child's voice trying to bring a story back to life. A canine search team located 2 missing teens in a collapsed shed behind their home. They had taken shelter there after the main house roof failed. The dog alerted to movement under debris. Rescuers dug them out with hand tools. Both were cold and bruised, but safe. "We thought no one knew we were here," said one of the teens through tears. In the rural outskirts of the county, 2 massive wind turbine blades snapped mid-storm, scattering fiberglass across nearby fields. Residents say the sound was like cannon fire. One farmer found a 12-foot shard embedded in his barn. It missed the cows by inches, he said. The turbines, rated for high winds, weren't meant to withstand the recorded 140 miles per hour gusts. No injuries were reported, but the incident reignited debate about wind energy infrastructure in hurricane-prone areas. Engineers have been dispatched to assess the remaining turbines for structural weakness. An estimated 12 million tons of debris now cover the affected coastal region. Everything from drywall to rooftops to boats thrown inland lies in chaotic piles across roads and lawns. Landfills are overwhelmed. Officials plan to open temporary dump sites and have called in National Guard units to assist with logistics. Cleanup costs could exceed $500 million. The storm was an hour long. The cleanup may take a year, said a federal disaster response coordinator. First responders were stunned to find an SUV lodged halfway into the second-floor balcony of an apartment complex. According to witnesses, a parked vehicle was lifted by extreme winds during the hurricane's peak and hurled across a 40-foot embankment. No one was inside the SUV, and the residents of the affected apartment were unharmed. "I thought it was a bomb going off," said one tenant. Engineers say wind acceleration between nearby buildings likely created a tunnel effect. "It wasn't just strong wind. It was focused, violent wind," said a structural analyst on scene. A rescue team responding to a 911 call found an elderly man trapped in his attic by rising water. He had broken through the ceiling with a crowbar and waited for 18 hours with a flashlight and a transistor radio. They heard the tapping from the boat, he said. He was dehydrated but otherwise fine. They were angels, he said of the crew. When the winds began tearing shingles from roofs, 68-year-old Lester Jennings ran outside to retrieve his garbage bins. A sudden gust knocked him off his feet and sent him sliding across his lawn. He grabbed onto the metal base of his mailbox and held on as the wind roared over him. "I thought I'd be blown into the next county," he said. When the storm passed, he was soaked, bruised, but alive. His mailbox was bent and his house badly damaged, but Jennings credits that metal post for saving his life. "Strongest thing I ever installed," he joked. During the height of the storm, a power crew spotted a cow standing calmly on the second-story balcony of an abandoned motel. The wind had apparently pushed it up a ramp and into the building. The balcony railing kept it from falling. It was safely led back to ground level once winds died down. Locals now call it the flying cow miracle, and the motel owner says he's never seen anything like it. Still had better manners than most guests, he added. When the hurricane hit, 16-year-old Brianna lost nearly everything. Her family's home was badly damaged, and most of their belongings vanished in the wind. But 3 days later, a neighbor found her bright blue prom dress tangled in a tree 3 miles away, still intact. "It sounds silly," she said, "but it was the one thing that felt normal." Volunteers cleaned and restored it. Local businesses are now planning a community prom for displaced teens. "After everything we've lost," Brianna said, "this one dress being found made it feel like hope's still out there." As students and staff were being evacuated from the local high school, a massive gust tore off the gymnasium roof, sending metal panels flying across the parking lot. Surveillance footage shows teachers herding children out just moments before collapse. "We had 20 seconds, maybe less," said Principal Harris. No one was injured, though several cars were crushed by falling debris. Officials say the storm's wind speeds exceeded 120 miles per hour. The gym, built in the 1960s, was not rated for such conditions. Classes remained suspended. "We were lucky," Harris added. "That wind came for blood." During the worst hours of the storm, volunteer firefighter Dana Price made solo trips by boat into flooded neighborhoods, rescuing 11 people, including a bedridden woman and 3 small children. With official resources overwhelmed, Price launched her own kayak from the fire station and worked through the night. "I just couldn't sit there and wait," she said. Battling wind, darkness, and floating wreckage, she pulled one family from a rooftop using bed sheets as rope. Residents are calling her a hero. "She didn't hesitate," one survivor said. "She saved us when no one else could get through." Coast Guard crews rescued 27 people from rooftops in one suburb alone. High water made roads impassable, and helicopters worked for hours. Most were elderly, some waving towels or flashlights. One couple was lowered in a harness with their cat in a laundry basket. All were taken to a makeshift landing zone at the football stadium and evaluated for injuries. The 140-year-old bell tower of St. Jude's Church collapsed overnight as hurricane winds exceeding 100 miles per hour battered the region. Witnesses described a thunderous cracking sound before the structure crumbled, scattering bricks across the square. No one was injured as the area had been evacuated, but the loss of the historic landmark hit locals hard. "It was the soul of this town," one resident said through tears. Authorities say the winds were too strong for the aging structure to withstand. Volunteers are already planning to preserve parts of the wreckage for future restoration. A 9-year-old boy separated from his parents during evacuation was found safe at a shelter 60 miles away. Volunteers shared his photo online, and it was seen by a cousin who contacted officials. Reunification took 2 days. "He was scared but okay," said a nurse at the shelter. Over 200 children were temporarily unaccompanied in the days following the storm. A giant inflatable gorilla, once perched above a used car lot, was spotted drifting high above rural farmland after being snatched by hurricane winds. Witnesses reported seeing the 30-foot figure tumbling through the sky, like a flying bear doing flips. It eventually landed in a tree nearly 12 miles away, startling a herd of cattle. No one was injured, but videos of the airborne mascot have gone viral. "He was our landmark," said the dealership owner. "Now he's a legend." Officials reminded business owners to deflate outdoor inflatables before storms. Over 4,000 utility poles were downed across the affected zone, leaving more than 300,000 residents without power. Some communities may remain dark for weeks. Substations flooded, transmission lines snapped, and transformer fires were reported in multiple locations. Repair crews from 6 neighboring states have been dispatched, working 16-hour shifts. "We've never had this many lines down at once," said a utility spokesperson. Hospitals and shelters are running on backup generators, with fuel being airlifted into remote areas. Officials gave coastal towns 36 hours to evacuate. Despite warnings, some chose to stay. In one beachside community, only 14 of 113 residents left. Emergency responders recorded final GPS coordinates of every home. "They were polite but firm," one woman recalled. By the time she changed her mind, the roads were flooded. She was rescued 4 days later by helicopter. At 3 a.m., police cruisers drove slowly down residential streets, loudspeakers repeating evacuation orders in English and Spanish. Most families had already gone, but some waited too long. Volunteers knocked on doors, helped an elderly woman down the stairs, and carried a toddler wrapped in a blanket. Buses idled at the school parking lot as final groups climbed aboard. Hours later, that neighborhood was underwater. "We got out just in time," said one man, still clutching his dog. A 30-foot metal billboard was torn from its supports and hurled through the second-story window of a downtown apartment complex. Miraculously, no one was in the room when it hit. The wind-carried structure demolished furniture, shattered glass, and embedded part of itself into the opposite wall. "It sounded like a bomb went off," said a neighbor. Fire officials said if the impact had happened an hour earlier, during a birthday party in the same unit, there would have been fatalities. The billboard's remains were later found 4 blocks away. An old man stood in the ruins of his workshop, running his hands over rusted tools he'd once polished every week. The wind had knocked down one wall, but left the other 3 standing, like a set on a stage. He didn't speak much as neighbors offered help. Instead, he swept sawdust from the floor, straightened a stool, and set a bent hammer carefully on the bench. "It's not gone," he finally said, "just quieter now." Moments before a violent gust lifted their camper off the ground, 9-year-old Tyler was yanked out by his older sister, who heard the structure creaking. "I don't know why, but I just grabbed him and ran," she said. Seconds later, the wind tossed the camper 50 feet across a field, smashing it into trees. The family had ignored evacuation orders, thinking the storm wouldn't hit hard. Officials say the siblings narrowly avoided tragedy. "If she had waited even 5 seconds more," a firefighter said, "we'd be telling a different story." After the storm, a cross made of driftwood was discovered lodged upright in a sand dune where dozens had sought shelter. Locals have since preserved it as a symbol. "It felt like he marked the place where we were saved," said one evacuee. "We'll never move it."
A storm rips the roof off a shed with the owner still on top of it. Besides a couple of bruises, he was completely fine.
In the early hours after the hurricane made landfall, 62-year-old Marvin Ellis carried his paralyzed neighbor 2 miles through waist-high floodwaters to reach a rescue point. With no cell service and streets submerged, Ellis wrapped the man in plastic sheeting, tied him to his back with extension cords, and waded through swirling debris. "I couldn't leave him. He's family," Ellis said. Both were treated for exhaustion and exposure. Paramedics say their survival came down to Ellis's strength, calm thinking, and deep sense of duty. "He saved my life," the neighbor whispered from his hospital bed. After the storm cleared, dozens of residents posted photos of found items,